Good morning, friends, and welcome back to NPTEL online certification course on public speaking. In the previous lecture, I gave you a brief overview of interviews in general, the prerequisites of interview, the purposes, and also some focus was devoted to how one should get ready for interviews. And towards the end, we had ended with a quote by Graham Bell, where we had come to know that there is always an opportunity waiting for all of us. Now, since you have been knocking on the doors of opportunity, in this lecture, we shall be talking about how to respond to opportunities in different types of interviews. So, this lecture is entitled Types of Interviews, and there will be two lectures on the types of interviews. So, we are going to discuss the first part of the type of interviews. Now, before we go into the depth of the discussion, let us take a quote by Olawale Daniel, which some way or the other related to one organization where he keeps on providing training and recruiting people. So, what he says is quite significant. The goal of an interview session is to find the right person. So, we had in the previous lecture also referred to that most of the people or organizations, they are looking for right people fit for the job and not just to fill a role. We are not simply going to fill the slots, but we actually are looking for the right people. Now, how can one be a right person? So, if we try to find out the answer to know who can be the right person, let us try to understand what an interview is. And once again, as we discussed in the previous lecture, it is actually a communicative process which may proceed with a plan to collect data. Collect data about whom? Collect data about the interviewee, about the candidate, about the respondent. Now, this data collection can be employed in diverse fields. If it is a job market, if it is the field of journalism, if it is the field of qualitative research, ethnographic research. So, in all these, we actually are looking for a fit person who can provide us in getting the right kind of data. So, the interview process changes according to the needs and context of the interview setup. Now, only 2 years have passed by and we have been able to overcome pandemic. Do you know how that might have been done? How every other day we come to know that such and such number of people have already been inoculated, have been vaccinated, and that also in different phases. And again, we also are in a position to understand how many people are still active, how many people are getting treatment, how many people have recovered. So, how is that possible? That is possible only with the help of data collection. Now, next to that, we must understand how we can categorize interviews. Of course, we have in the previous lecture talked about some sorts of interviews, but then when we are going to conduct an interview for data collection or soliciting data, so it can be categorized and studied under various types which actually require 4 criteria. What are these four criteria? Any interview of such nature depends upon the purpose. What is the purpose behind this data collection? And once you know the purpose, what is the structure? And once you understand the structure, now you are going to have a sort of design, and then comes the medium. We shall be spending some time on discussing all these. Now, when you talk about the purposes of such interviews, the major aim is to collect data. That is for sure, all of us know. To collect data for what? For further discussion and analysis. Because any decision that has to be taken has to be based on the data, and this data will actually tell us what is the present condition and what actually is required. That is why we say further discussion and analysis, further discussion and analysis. Now, depending on the scenario, this data will be used to analyze candidates, focus groups also. Imagine that candidates are to be recruited for data collection. So, when we have this aim in mind, before that we want to have the data of the candidates. So, once you have the data of the candidates, then you can also think of the focus groups. So, when we talk about these purpose based interviews, that can be for job interviews, that also can be in the field of research interviews, that can be also for clinical interviews. Sometimes you are trying to find out or collect the data on the for a particular disease and why it is going to pick up, what are the regions behind. So, clinical interviews. And then sometimes in the field of journalism, such a data is also conducted. This data collection is also for journalistic interviews. So, the method of conducting and analyzing this interview process, of course, can vary, can differ based on the interviewer's choice and interest. Now, to remind you once again, interviewers are the people who are interviewing for a specific purpose the candidates. Now, another type of interview where structure is given a lot of importance. Now, this structure based interviews actually require to be structured. Sometimes it has to be semi structured and sometimes it is unstructured. Now, this structure actually can help us understand the primary quality which includes one's mood, tone and flow. Even if it is for a personality test also, then you want to understand the mood, tone and the flow. In any interview, the structure has to be determined. And how can it be determined? Through question answer sessions. And when the question answer session begins, you will find the answer to one question actually invites another follow up question. Fine? And this sort of exchange between the interviewers and the interviewee actually help us a lot in determining the structure. Now, who has actually the last control? The control actually lies with the interviewers, because it is actually the interviewer who governs the direction of the interview. You answered a particular question and you will find the next question, which is a follow up question, may again generate another set of questions, whether it is by the same interviewer or by some other person if it is going to be a panel interview. Now, when a structured interview is organized or held, it posits itself as more rigid. No, the interviewers, based on the data that they have got through one's CV or through one's resume, they have already structured some sort of questions. They are very rigid in this regard, and if it is compared to an unstructured interview, now this unstructured interview may go in any direction, fine. Unstructured interview may be very flexible. You will find that there can be different sorts of questions which are asked just to evaluate the candidate's mood, tone, personality, potential, values, his ethical responsibility, whatsoever. But when it is very rigid in nature, we call it a structured interview, structure based interview. Now, when we talk about a structure based interview, there is a standard protocol. Imagine you are going to conduct an interview, or a board is going to conduct an interview for the selection of the judges. Now, naturally, the questions that will be pulled or the questions that will be asked must maintain a sort of proper protocol, and the set of questions are pre-established, as I said. Now, in such a situation, because here you are going to select the best candidates, so naturally the questions will be of the same nature, the same type for all sorts of respondents. Of course, the presentation of the questions will be different. They may be given a case, they may be given a sort of process in which their own judgment, I mean the process of their judgment can be evaluated. So, the objective nature of structured interview has an advantage, and this advantage is this is not biased, this is actually less biased, fine. Now, when a company is hiring through structured interviews, having specific questions, naturally they set a proper tone and they have a proper rubric so that they can very easily assess the candidate's answers. Of course, there is another hazard to it, and the hazard is that not every now and then this one size fit approach, because as I have said that the questions would remain the same for all the respondents, but maybe on certain occasions this one size fit approach may seem redundant, may seem not to be working. For that, we require a sort of unstructured interview. This unstructured interview, as the word goes, it actually employs just the opposite style of conductive interviews as structured one. Now, there is a different sort of flow, there is a different sort of flexibility. The questions may not have been very systematic, the questions may be put in different directions, and the approach in this regard is to make the candidates feel very comfortable. My dear friends, as you grow up in ladders in your professional life, you will find that interviews will become very cordial, and nowadays cordiality is also one of the criteria of an interview. Questions in unstructured interview are not prepared in advance, but then much depends upon the presence of mind of the interviewees and also the interviewers. The first responsibility is that of the interviewers, who will use their presence of mind because they do not have a prepared set of questions to be asked. Now, such an interview especially is employed or is conducted in academic research interviews and focus group studies. As I said, as you grow, not only in years, but when you are actually vying for a very responsible position, the nature of questions will be very flexible. For academic research purposes, such an interview appears to be preferred over structured interview. Now, there can be another category of interview also, which is semi-structured interview. Now, this semi-structured interview, as the word semi itself suggests, that it can be half structured, half unstructured. It has got an objective value of a structured interview and the subjective quality of an unstructured. I mean, questions will come and then you will find the nature of questions, the volume of questions will be different from the easy ones to the difficult ones. At times it may actually take the candidates to the depth of the subject. So, the trajectory of such an interview shifts from structured to unstructured. In the beginning the questions will be very structured and later on it will be unstructured, and maybe at times there is an inclusion of certain fundamental questions also, just to test the presence of mind of the candidates. Now, having discussed the structure, it is time that we discussed the design of such interviews. Now, the design of the interviews also depends upon the interviewers. It signifies the parties which are involved in the interview. So, every organization will first tell you what actually is their approach, what is the objective. So, there can be variation in the number of both interviewer and the interviewee. There are certain subcategories also. Maybe in certain situations only individual interview will be helpful. But then sometimes there can be panel interview where a group of people will be there. Sometimes there can be a group interview. Say for example, you are going to be interviewed for a project which is to be given to you. So, maybe there is a group interview and then there can be focus group interview also. Now, let us talk about individual interview where it is one-to-one, as I said in the previous lecture. It is an interrogative session solely devised to be one-on-one between a single interviewer and a single interviewee. In most of the times, you will find that for small organizations and all, where they require some people very urgently and they require people with specific abilities and sets, then one-to-one interview can also be there. Now, this individual interview provides more space both for the interviewee as well as for the interviewer. So, there may not be any scope for too much of bias. Rather, the interviewer is always concerned about what sort of person he has to select. So, full attention is provided and even the candidate also receives full attention. It also enables crafting personalized interview scenarios to suit the needs of the party involved. In certain cases, after a panel interview has been over, maybe the last round of interview can be an individual interview where you can meet the main boss or the person who is going to decide your fate. So, depending upon the nature of the job, such interviews can be conducted. Now, we come to panel interviews. As the word panel itself suggests that there can be more than one person in the interviewer's camp. So, the dynamics of such an interview has got more and more number of people, fine, who are interviewing or interrogating or asking questions to one candidate, fine, and these panel of interviewers might accompany a range of professionals. Maybe there are people from academics, maybe there are people from psychology. They actually try to understand the values and the ethics of a person. Sometimes or the other, when you find that there can be a panel interview for an organization where they want to recruit a person who can head the organization. Now, in this, there will be people from different fields, experts from different fields. This panel interview is handy to check the interviewee on different skill backgrounds. So, the questions may not be purely academic, the questions may not be purely professional, but the questions may also be sometimes the questions may also be informal because the person who is going to be appointed has to take certain decisions also on certain occasions. So, panel interview is challenging, my dear friend. And then we come to group interview. Unlike panel interview, I mean, we find that in group interviews also there are more people. In panel interview, there are people from different areas. So, unlike panel interviews, group interviews simply include multiple interviews. I mean, there are so many candidates at the same time and they are to be interviewed simultaneously at the same time. Now, what are the advantages? Actually, it saves a lot of time. Sometimes some group has submitted a report and the person who is going to take a decision wants to know, fine, the entire thing just in a limited amount of time. So, all the people are invited for the discussion, I mean all the group members. So, it allows the interviewer to compare and evaluate multiple participants. Group interviews look out for leadership skills. Now, imagine a project is to be given. The questions are asked, but the interviewers will see to it that who can take the lead role, who has got the leadership ability. And in this, the interviewees compete with each other to present themselves unique from the rest of the group. You have already found when we were discussing group discussions, there was one aim of finding out who can have the leadership ability. So, you might have at times found that there is a sort of skirmish, there is actually a sort of very tough competition. Everyone wants to override each other, everyone wants to compete with each other, but then the interviewers are very intelligent and they are men of understanding. They know who can lead and they are trying their best to find out the leadership qualities. Now comes focus group interview. Now, what do we mean by focus group interview? Of course, at times you may confuse it with group interviews, but then the difference between group and focus interviews lies only in the intent. While group interviews are usually done for hiring purposes, focus group interview is conducted for market research purposes. Fine? You understand the difference now? So, it is in the intention where lies the difference. So, focus group interview is conducted as a qualitative research method to study the preferences and perceptions of a particular group, and based on that you may perhaps assign them the roles. Fine. So, focus group interviews are comparatively less rigid. Here, as an interviewer, you try to find out who can do which sort of job. So, it is actually a matter of intention, and this focus group interview is conducted mostly for research purposes. Now, when we talk about focus group interviews, we must make a mention of laddering technique, which Professor Michael Howley suggests as one of the best ways. So, this laddering technique is one of those market research interviews which actually became very popular in the 1960s. This technique has got a hierarchical way of understanding the market choices of consumers. It is of course just like collecting data by asking people, by interviewing people, and consumers are actually in this focus group interview technique, consumers are the focus group who have to be studied. It actually follows means and chain theory, which actually talk about the attributes, and these attributes can tell us, can determine the choices of individual consumers. Fine. So, now what do consumers value most? What actually are their expectations? Why they feel? I mean, such a sort of questions may be there, but then the main intention is to conduct a research interview, and this is actually a sequence. ACB sequence forms a chain or a ladder that indicates the relationship between product and people, So Michael Howley suggests that such a sort of interview thrives or prospers on questions like why and how the product matters in an individual's life. Why and how the product matters in an individual's life. Now, when we have discussed all these sorts of interviews, whether it is for market research, whether it is for academic purposes, whether it is for one-to-one or it is in a panel one, I mean, we need to be reminded of what was said or what was discussed in the previous lecture as to, for all sorts of interviews, one has to display proper confidence, one has to understand how and in which manner language to be used. For example, one wants to understand the choices of the consumers, then naturally one would select such a sort of language as to the responses must be very favorable to us. This is very important. Moreover, when we are in a panel interview, you must as a candidate see to it how the interviewers vary their questions from the structured to the unstructured. Maybe at times it can be samey, isn't it? Half is structured, half is unstructured. And one must always arm oneself with a proper decorum and dignity by wearing the proper dress for the occasion. Unless, nowadays there is one common ailment which is actually guiding many of us is regarding the choice of our dress. At times we have also failed because we do not know what sort of dress to be worn for what occasion. My dear friends, interview is a formal communication, and it actually requires not only for a candidate to display himself or present himself physically and mentally, but psychologically also. Because what you speak, the way you sit, the way you move, the way you bend, the way you squirm throughout the interview, that actually tell a lot about the candidate's disposition, which actually matters a lot, my dear friend. So if we keep all these things into consideration and preparation apart, my dear friend, because preparation is the antidote, as I have been saying, in all sorts of public speaking situations. It is preparation that works as a panacea, isn't it? So if you keep all these things into consideration, there is no way that you are not going to be shortlisted, but you are also going to succeed. But in order to succeed, you need, apart from all these, your own presence of mind, which is very important. My dear friends, having said all these, you are in a better mental condition and you are in a proper disposition, then naturally at times there are certain questions asked. One has to answer very subtly, in a very clever manner, as Theodore Roosevelt says, whenever you are asked if you can do a job, tell them, certainly I can. Then get busy and find out how to do it. Now, what is the essence? The essence is that if you are asked such a question, because at times you are asked a question which may be imaginary, at times I have also felt that when you ask a candidate about when you are going to join if you are selected, some of the candidates start thinking that perhaps they are going to be selected. My dear friends, they are actually trying to understand about your readiness for the job. So what Roosevelt says has got much food for thought, because as he says, if you are asked if you can do a job, tell them, certainly I can, meaning thereby the answer has to be in the affirmative. And once you have said that, then get busy and find out how to do it. All of you are intelligent people and you understand, and rather you must understand that nothing is as important a key in the success of an interview than a positive and optimistic outlook. I think you know the difference between an optimist and a pessimist. A pessimist is one who always looks at the dark side of things, whereas an optimist is one who always looks at the bright side of things. So I think all of you who are enrolled in this course entitled Public Speaking must look at the bright side of things and be optimistic, because if you have come to this earth, you have every right to have mirth, and this mirth is possible only when with your efforts you can carve a niche for yourself, and I'm quite sure that you are going to carve a niche for yourself. You are going to make a destiny of yourself by proper effort, proper karma. With this, I come to the end of this talk. Thank you very much. I wish you all to be optimistic and wish you all to start preparing for your next interview. Thank you very much.